This one, a smaller one. This is 2 frames a second, this one. The other ones were 8 frames a second for the duration. And I don't think I need that because I'm not zipping around the screen with the cursor, with the mouse. Okay. So what stands before you is a very simple model that I put together to illustrate. This is in fact the model we were annotating with units last time. You may recognize it. My point is not to talk about the model here. This is what I call the core of the model. Often we have models which consists of a core which simulates, say, the evolution of the population over time, simulates perhaps the natural progression of disease in individuals, transmission, etc. But often there's a lot of additional structure in these models that is what I would call epiphenomenal. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't influence the evolution of this core, but it's influenced by it. It perhaps helps us understand the state of the core, helps us compute quantities that we may be interested in, which we may be interested. It helps us, summarize the current state of the evolution of that state in a more compact way, without in any way influencing the evolution of this model. So what would be an example of some epiphenomenal things? You've seen them in the models that I think everyone has been involved with here. Everyone who's built a model. There have been some things that are a bit epiphenomenal. What would be one of them? Can you give me an example?
I don't think I understand what epiphenomenal is.
Okay, it's a very important concept, so don't dismiss it. It basically is something that's in the model which doesn't influence the model evolution. So this model is evolving. These stocks are evolving, right? The stocks, we know, summarize the state of the system, right? Mm-hmm. The evolution of those stocks dictates the evolution of the system. But there are frequently variables that are used in the model that do not influence the evolution of that state.
So some variables have more impact than others, essentially.
Well, that's true. And there's often big classes of variables that don't affect the evolution of the state variables, but they're of great interest to us. Could you give an example?
Virulence bacteria.
They all affect it, don't they?
So that might affect transmission, but okay.
Or the immunity against the microorganisms. Like if you are immune against a virus, it will be permanent. But if you are immune against certain bacteria, it might be temporary, but might be permanent.
Okay, but immunity might, for example, reflect that someone's going from here to here, so that would affect it. But I mean, just think in concrete terms. I mean, I know, like Aziz's model is just loaded with things that don't impact this, right?
So something like total population, is that?
Yeah. Here it actually is used here, but that would be an example.
Okay. So
or total number of people who have been infected before, been infected recently, I plus T or something.
Right. So
like
they aren't
that.
involved in the processes of the model.
They're not dictating the evolution of the model.
All the auxiliary
All the auxiliary variables.
Yeah.
I mean, Karen's has tons of these things too.
Yeah.
Subtotals are different groups in the population. Convenient calculations that allow you to know the cumulative number of people who've ever been infected or whatever.
Like
there has to be a better word than epiphenomenal.
basically epidemiological things that are interest us, basically, right? Variables.
Often they are.
Interest.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, epiphenomenal is a word from philosophy that where epi is used in a different sense. But I mean, it's actually the same Latin root. Or Latin or Greek.
So is it like short from like something like epistemology then? Like is that what?
No, I think it means it's basically not involved in the core processes. So these are just things. I don't want to overstate this thing, but it's just important to realize there's a lot of variables often associated with a model that you could cut out and it wouldn't change model evolution at all. right?
It's interesting because we don't come across that in actual epidemiology, and so that's why
We often have a lot of convenience variables that are added because we want to see this quantity or that quantity. And, you know, okay, so what I'm going to be talking with you about is not going to affect, it's going to be epiphenomenal in the sense that it's not going to affect this component. This is our core component of the model. And when I was teaching 858 or last week's tutorial, what I predominantly concentrated on was things like this. It was these core parts of a model, right? Because those are, in a way, the more substantive or demanding issues. But often we have other components of a model, too. One of the ones that we may want to make use of are things that compute cost or other sort of summary health information. Regarding a model. And so these things here are going to depend on that stuff we saw up here. Where are the dependencies? Can anyone suggest to me where's the dependency of all of this sort of stuff on what we saw up there, on those stocks and flows that we just saw?
As in like where we see ghost variables?
Yeah, that's exactly it. SIT, for example, new recoveries, total population. Those are things that come from up above, those main core stocks. But what we're computing here is costs and life years, okay? This is accumulating stuff. Now,
Cost on what?
this would be costs associated with treatment, for example, or costs associated with the healthcare costs borne by the population in different states. And I'm just showing here, this is not a particularly well-grounded model, but this is to show how you can incorporate these into a model in a very simple way. So what we have here is a rate of new costs. So these are costs per month being exerted by those people that we saw circulating up there. So the people up here at the top, susceptible, infected, and temporarily recovered. The idea is that they're exerting some costs on the healthcare system. A susceptible person might have a certain cost. So, they go see the doctor, they make use of healthcare facilities a certain amount. And there's a certain number of those people. This is their cost per month, perhaps, and we get costs coming out of that per month for the entire susceptible population. And that's simply S times this S monthly cost per person. This is per person. Cost per person.
Would that go to the person like income? Because if he's sick, he can't go and work, or
right. So
would that add into this kind of?
So that's a very good question. I mean, so the question is, this monthly cost per person, does that take only into account direct costs, like the costs associated with purchasing pharmaceuticals, or the costs of, seeing a doctor and having some tests done in a doctor's office? Or does this monthly cost include something like the opportunity cost, the cost because the person can't work or something along those lines? And different models will have different scope of what they include as part of the cost. Another important question here, and this is not something I want to go into today, but are you taking into account costs to society, or costs borne to the individual, or costs borne to the sort of local healthcare system or provincial system? Because those are going to be different levels of cost. If you're talking about something like someone with TB, there may be certain costs they bear out of pocket. There may be certain costs that are borne, by the local authorities, and maybe some costs borne by the provincial authorities, and maybe in some cases costs borne by FINI or something along those lines, and you might want to separate those. So part of the issues that goes into models is thinking about, okay, what sort of costs do we have? My focus today is just on sort of showing mechanically how you can build these things and have them build these things into a model. So here we have some monthly costs associated with infected people. So each month someone's infected, what are their costs? They're imposing, say, on the healthcare system. And this is the number of people. So this is per person cost and the number of people that are infected. Similarly, temporarily immune people, temporarily immune monthly costs. So this here quantifies the costs that are borne, each of these a turn, quantify the costs that are borne by by all susceptibles per month, the cost borne by all infecteds per month, and the cost borne by all temporarily immune people per month. We could sum those together and get costs associated, borne by the healthcare system for people anywhere in this model, okay? So these are, again, costs per person, like I monthly cost is the cost per person for someone who's infected, multiply it times the number of infected people, and you get out the costs for those people. Okay, so these are costs we're imposing for people who are in a given stock, so someone's in the susceptible stock, and there's a certain cost per month associated with being in that stock, right? And that's how we're getting it. We may have other costs that we want to associate with flows. For example, when someone is treated, depending on an illness, let's suppose it's something like chlamydia or something like gonorrhea, they undergo some sort of treatment, there may be a cost associated with that treatment. It's not so much that while they're in this stock, say asymptomatic, that they impose the cost in the healthcare system. It's really when they flow this way, they impose a cost in the healthcare system. So to capture that, one thing we can do instead of having a cost per month times a certain number of people who are in the stock, here we have a flow of people per month, and we multiply it a cost for the treatment. So when a person goes down that flow, they get treated, and that treatment bears a cost. And that gives us new treatment costs per month. So here we have sort of a flow rate measured per month. This could be the direct flow if our general time unit was month. And we multiply that times the cost, and we get treatment costs per month. Okay?
I have a question.
Sure.
Is the recovery is a flow or is it a stop?
This is a flow. That's
What can we use a flow here? This case is a rate,
new recovery.
so
It's the actual number.
It's the actual number of people going per month. This is per year, and then we per day, and this is days per month, and we get number of people per month who recover. Do you see what I mean? So maybe there's 10 people a day
yes.
who are recovering. That's what new recovery is, 10. And that's 10 per day, and this is days per month. Let's suppose we say it's 30.5. So on average, that's 305 people recovering per month. And each of those people has a sort of one-time cost associated with treatment of this cost. And we multiply that and get a certain number of treatment costs per month. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's treatment costs per month.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, I still think it is because the flow might be very huge, but actually the number of people at a specific time is might be very small.
Well, okay, so remember flow is like people per time, right?
Yeah, people at a time.
And if the flow is huge, there's lots of people leaving per unit time. Maybe it's 1,000 a day or something, right? And if it's 1,000 a day and each of those people costs $10 for treatment, 1,000 a day people, $10 for treatment of each person, that would be $10,000 for treatment per day. That makes sense? 1,000 per day people, $10 per treatment per person,
Yeah.
$10,000 a day treatment costs.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think you're talking about how it affects the stock,
Yeah,
right?
it
But this
is
is
not-
not, we don't care about that right now. We're just caring
Oh.
about the number of people that leave per time.
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
So what they care is the
Is the
person.
actual flow per time.
Oh.
Yes,
So
that's right.
The flow
Right, yeah.
and the stock could be different in terms of their size.
Because the flow is actually,
Yeah.
when the flow incurs the cost on the health system.
That's right. For this case.
Yeah.
Here, we
Yeah.
could model a case where it's being in the stock that incurs the cost. In which case, we'd model it more like
That's what I was
this.
thinking, it's the
Yeah.
stock
Yeah.
that we should be doing.
And there are some things where it could be that. Like if while you're infected, you're in a hospital bed, and you're getting treated.
Like active TV.
Yeah.
states.
Yeah, that's right. You're getting treated on a regular basis. You know, throughout your time in the stock, and it may be shorter, it may be longer. Then I'd say it's more like, okay, these are active TB cases, and this is some monthly cost associated with an active TB case. You multiply those, and you get the new cost associated with active TB cases. So you,
Those
So you
people
can use
also-
for TB.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No, for in that case of TB, then the diagnosis, there would be some
cost.
cost
Yeah,
associated with the diagnosis
right.
as well as being in the state.
That's right.
Depending on how
And,
long you are.
and often you will have that. Yeah,
Yeah.
you'll have some cost maybe with doing the transplant operation, and then a cost subsequent to that associated with, you know, maintaining you with immunosuppressive drugs and post transplant. So my point in sort of showing these was just to give a sense of the different situations you might encounter. One where the costs are borne by the flow, and here the costs are borne by being associated with the stock. In any case, what you get out from multiplying, you know, this by this or this by this is some dollars per month in costs, right? And we can, that's our sort of new costs, and we can just accumulate that.
Have you checked your units?
That's what we were doing last time. That's a different topic. So here's the new
We're
cost.
adding per month to
Yeah,
a month
yeah.
cost. So how does that plan?
Is that hectares per dollar?
Yeah, because I got
So,
Hey, there's a legitimate question here. She's saying that I did think so, right?
What's that?
Yeah,
She's
the
saying, how are you
cost
adding the
that
slope to
Because
the-
I think just like the units might not consist with the above ones. Because for the new treatment cost per month, it is a kind of a rate. Always say, but for the above one, it is dollars also.
No, this is monthly cost. So this is dollars per month that you're in this stock, right?
Yeah.
So this would be how many dollars per month to give you these drugs for TB times the number of people who are active cases for TB under treatment. So this is dollars per month
Per person.
per person
Dollar per month.
times persons will be dollars per month. And then you could add these two. That's a very good thing. You're thinking about these. Yeah, very, very good. And then, and then you've got these new population costs, which are dollars per month. You've got new costs. I don't know what this is doing there.
Days per month.
And that's not, shouldn't be there.
So you're trying to get it into days.
Oh, that's right, because this is days. Yeah, this extra, that's right. Because the model's representation of time is days.
And that's in months right
So,
now.
so this is in monthly cost. This is in monthly cost because here you have healthcare workers and then a monthly cost for the healthcare workers to keep them going. And so this is new worker cost, dollars per month. You need to convert that to dollars per day, both of these. And then that would be new cost per day. And then you can just accumulate that, right? By the way, this is a very common use of stocks, and I want to make sure everyone's very comfortable with that. I mean, often what will this start? Stock will start at zero typically, and it will just accumulate cumulative costs all the way through the time. You can do that very nicely, right? To accumulate cumulative infections. How would you do that? You'd go up here, right? Cumulative infections, all we need to do is have a stock cumulative infection starts at zero, and then its inflow would just be new infections here. It would just accumulate the number of infections over all time. No outflow because it's just totaling up the number that have occurred, right? Okay, so this is cumulative costs. Now, we can do something similar for life years. Life years lived by the population. Here's our total population. S plus I plus T, right? Total population, this guy right here. That's the total number of people or any of the stocks at a given point in time. Then we can figure out, okay, let's suppose that time, let's sidestep this for just a moment. Let's suppose that time were measured in years in the model, that the time unit was years. if we just had the flow depending on total population, and we had the flow depending on total population. Suppose there was one person and they only were alive for 1 year, and after that there's nobody in the model. How many life years would be accumulated?
So what's our population?
One.
Oh, so it's 1 life year.
1 life year. How if it was 2 people for each alive for a year?
2 life years.
2 life years. How if it was
360. 360 life years.
how if it was 1 person alive for 2 years?
Same thing,
2 life years. 2 life years. Right. So if we have a total population and we had years as the unit of time, we could just feed it in here as the stock. Automatically you have been integral, as you may recall. If we have a flow that's of units x, the stock is always of units what? X times,
What?
okay, so let's put it in, I'm going to put it another way. If we have a stock, no, this makes sense. So if you have a flow of units x, yeah. If you have a flow of units x, what is the stock? What must the units of the stock be?
X
X
times delta t?
X times the time unit,
Yeah.
right? If you, yeah, or put it another way, if you have a stock
You
of,
confused me. Because what you said was, you said that we have a flow of x.
yeah,
But it's x per time.
well,
Then, so
so we're giving the
Unit
label
six.
X for those units.
Yeah.
X per time is, something per time, we could call that X, right? Yeah. So the alternative way to
right,
think
so
about
then
it,
that's
which
the time
which is
limit.
probably a better way to express it, is if we had a stock whose units are Y, what's the units of the flow? It's Y per unit time, right? That's an easier way to think about it. But here we have a flow whose units are total population. And therefore the stock is total population, it's person times years. Person years. Right? Yeah. So this would be life years lived. By just feeding this in, total population right in here, this accumulates the life years lived by the population as if your unit of time were years. Of course, here a unit of time is not years, it's days. And so we have to divide this by days per year. If there's one person who lives 1 unit of time, that's only 1 day. They don't accumulate a whole life year. They accumulate 1/365th of a life year. Okay, so that's life years. Life years lived. Now, this is of interest. We're going to get into this discounting some other time. But that will be a separate discussion. Be about for tonight. This is a separate discussion. But suffice it to say that once we build into a model a measurement of something like costs or life years, first of all, it's quite easy to build in something like quality adjusted life years. Qualities. And that takes into account people's quality of life in different states. And it's a very similar structure to here. You have people in this state and a certain quality of life for being in that state, etc. And you could accumulate that over time. And the idea is that you want policies that not only add years to life, but life to years, as they say. And so you want to capture the quality of life impacts of policies, not just whether they extend people's lives. Does it improve the quality of people's lives? If you have 2 policies which extend people's lives by the same amount, but one of them adds quality to those lives so that the people are maintained at higher levels of functional activity, etc., that would be preferable, is the idea. In any case, so we have these costs and we have these life years. And you'll notice that the structure is fairly simple compared to the structure associated with the model up there, the core model, the kernel of the model. However, it's quite useful often. So you could run this model with different values of parameters, with different policies being simulated, and you'll get different accumulated costs, right? You'll get different life years accumulated. And sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want to see not just what is the number of people in this state at this given time, what is the total population at this given time. You want to actually look at cumulative life years to capture the fact that people, over the course of the whole simulation, there may be a reduction in the number of people at any given point that's modest, but overall it adds up to a significant discussion, sort of lowering of life years. Yes, Simon?
So you are taking the total population at the point in time, and you are going in progress. You are not going back retrospectively what policies were in 60s, 70s, 80s.
What
policy was?
Oh, I see. Well, in principle, you could do that. I think I see what you're saying. I mean, basically, you start where you are now at 0 life years, and you examine the impact of policies going forward from now. In principle, you could create a model that starts in 1975, for example, like Aziza's model, and you could simulate the accumulated life years, between 1975 and 2005, or accumulated costs associated with TB between those years. Sorry?
Or disease years.
Or disease years, yeah, because it could be illness years. Instead of having total population year, if this were illness years, what would this be instead of total population? It would be
Those in the disease state.
yeah, like you have here. That would simulate some illness years or illness days. It could be if you wanted. If you had people go back and forth quickly, do different states, you might capture the number of illness days and how to reduce that.
How is the quality measured? Like if you just wanted to have quality adjusted life
Yeah.
years and you have total population
Yeah.
in the non-disease state or whatever.
So I'm going to defer. So there's
Is that
there's
what you're
a whole sub-discipline of quality of life elicitation and outcomes research. It's often associated with, so there's quality of life measures, and this is often associated with what's called utility theory, and I will give a lecture on that topic, but it's a whole, it's a broader lecture. I'll also talk about discounting and the role that plays, but I'm gonna, because often in health economic sense, you look at not just quality adjusted life years or cost, you look at discounted costs, using that present value to bring it into the present. But this is a separate discussion I don't want to go into right now. The important thing to realize, though, to take away from this particular lecture is, first of all, adding this sort of stuff is not, at a mechanical level, it's not very hard. It's quite straightforward. The second thing is, a couple standardized ways of doing this take you a long way. I mean, model after model, you can fit it pretty nicely into this framework. Thirdly, this isn't affecting the original model up there. Fourthly, when you compare policies, you can compare the impact on costs. Like one policy might accumulate, $350 million in costs, and another one $375 million, but the first policy leads to lower life years lived, and the second policy has higher life years lived. And so it costs more, but it's higher number of life years. And the question then becomes, often what's the cost per life year gained, for example. For each life year you have gained, what's the cost for that? And if you have limited dollars, do you want to put them into this policy, which saves this many life years, or that policy, which saves that many life years? Again, that's a somewhat different discussion, but you can start to see how this builds the foundation for those sort of analyses, okay? So, just wanted to give you a glimpse of this, and I think I'll have some further discussion of the quality adjusted life years, the quality of life, and the discounting side of it, and a little bit on sort of cost effectiveness analysis using these forms in a separate little tutorial. Okay? Any questions about this before I break?
I saw these two policies in one paper in Time Magazine.
You saw the two.
Yes, saw these two policy about healthcare costs.
Oh yeah.
One is healthcare cost is very high, and the people's life expectation is very long.
Yeah.
The other is that there kind of a loop there. It is if you make the people live longer,
Yeah.
the cost will also increase.
Yeah.
And then it is similar to this one.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in these issues, and it's not always obvious. So when I was doing my, not to put too grim a note on it, but the question was, if you save people's lives using